Hello and welcome to my review of Ed McBain's The Gutter and the Grave. This edition dates from 2005, but the text was originally published in 1958 as I'm Cannon for Hire and attributed to Curt Cannon. This is a noir novel, typically hard-boiled, and features Matt Cordell, a former cop, former private eye, down on his luck and battling alcoholism. Into his world of flophouses and whiskey bottles comes Johnny Bridges. Bridges is an old friend and also the victim of a minor crime that turns major pretty rapidly. Bridges runs a tailor shop and small amounts of petty cash are going missing. He enlists Cordell for a brief investigation. They arrive at the shop and discover the body of his partner, Dom Archesi, with Bridges' initials scrawled on the wall beside him. Cordell is known to the police and as a drunk, not well liked. His initial reaction is to run, but Bridges' desperation forces him to stay and the two debate what to do. Cordell, the old-school investigator, realises the police will regard the dead man's evidence as enough for a conviction, and he proposes a different solution. "Leave me out of it," I said. "Leave me out of it and you've hired yourself a private detective." Essentially, Bridges is going to jail to await trial. The police investigation will be a perfunctory effort to gather evidence against him, and if Cordell's involvement is kept from them, he will be free to find the real killer. He begins an investigation of the crime, starting with Archesi's widow, Christine. Here, McBain channels the spirit of Raymond Chandler, and despite Cordell looking like he might pass for a man sometimes, but only because I once belonged to the human race, Christine agrees to talk to him. She is, as women usually are in this genre, quite the sight. She was a tall girl with a magnificent bosom and good hips, a little thick in the waist and legs, a strong girl with strong hands and jaw, a mouth full and meaningful, eyes like the blue steel of an automatic. Despite the cliché, McBain's characters are distinctly more real than many writing crime fiction in earlier eras. There is a touch of tell not show about his assertion that she is a big woman, peasant stock, a woman who filled every corner of a bed, a woman who had not wept in a long time. Given that it's the first time that she's appeared in the story, McBain is about to switch things up anyway, with the arrival of Christine's sister Lorraine. Those who tut at the description of the female form, especially their rising breasts caught in a cheap white sweater, might find McBain's detailed descriptions of such things not to their liking. But Lorraine is a force of nature, written before those same tutters ruined such characters, and as such, she sizes up Cordell in 2 seconds and is unimpressed. Lorraine is a woman determined to make it as a singer and crush anybody in her way, probably not with the bosom previously mentioned, because Cordell tells us ambition boiled inside her and overflowed from her ears. Her matter-of-fact reaction to Bridges' death is both in character and in keeping with the girl with a keen eye for a loser. She still tags along when Cordell goes for a drink and tells him that Christine and Dom have been separated for a few months and that Dom had hired a private investigator to try and find out if another man was involved. This is a story that brings back some home truths to Cordell, who had lost his own PI license after beating a man he found in bed with his own wife. Cordell follows Lorraine to her band practice and also meets with David Ryan, the band leader who pays for his sheet music, working part-time in the tailor shop. After saving her from a mugger, Cordell spends the night with Lorraine before going to the offices of the city's largest company of private investigators. Knowles Inc. is run by one Dennis Knowles, a fraudster and general sleaze, and he too has a history of Cordell, a history that left Knowles with a broken nose and a grudge to nurse. Knowles drops the bombshell that he was investigating the Archesi family, but not on behalf of a concerned husband, the recently murdered Dom. He was working for Johnny Bridges. Bridges and Christine were in love, he says, and Bridges was hoping to find evidence of Dom's infidelity, with divorce laws at the time being rather stricter than they are now. Cordell realises that, if true, Bridges has a huge motive to kill Dom, and that Christine Archesi, Johnny Bridges and Lorraine have all been lying to him, though the latter's lie about how long the Archesis have been separated might be a little more than an oversight or turn of phrase. The Archesi investigation had been carried out by an employee of Knowles's, Fran West, and she is next to get a visit from Cordell, and here the case takes another twist when Fran tells him that Dom did have another woman, none other than his wife's sister Lorraine. Despite being on the trail of either a murderer, a scandal, or both, the only criticism I'd level at McBain here is that he doesn't have the feel of any real urgency, nor is Cordell particularly proactive. Much of the time he spends with Lorraine, he himself acknowledges, is a waste of time. There weren't any investigative considerations involved at all. I was digressing. Shoot me. And while his digression is far from boring, Cordell owes his freedom to an innocent man locked in the cells and relying on him. A little more urgency, a little less dawdling with Lorraine wouldn't feel amiss. Pausing for yet another drink to consider his new evidence, Cordell is arrested. The police suspect he was involved with Bridges, and there are some pages that cover their questioning. All of those questions kept to one line, and with Cordell unable to discern which policeman is asking, he calls all of them by all of their names. "How long ago was that?" Jones asked, or Krutsky, or De Palma. "How old are you now, Cordell?" De Palma asked, or Krutsky, or Jones. "Then you weren't such kids," Krutsky said, or De Palma, or Jones. Establishing the disorientating effect of this, McBain then dispenses with the dialogue tags altogether and does a great job of the police's rapid-fire questioning as they attempt to catch Cordell out in a lie. He eventually confesses the truth, but is not charged. The police are relatively happy for him to continue his investigation if, ultimately, it helps with theirs. They do, however, tell him he'll be watched. Then he's allowed to see Bridges and confronts him with what he knows now. Bridges, however, denies or contradicts much of that. He claims to not know Knowles or any other private eye, that he was not seeing Dom's wife Christine, and that Dom was not seeing Lorraine because he, Bridges, was. Cordell then goes to Christine's to find the truth, but instead he finds her body. Luckily, he has an alibi for the afternoon in the form of his police trail. However, his alibi for the morning is dependent on Fran West. He's soon back with Lorraine and questions her on which of Dom or Johnny she was dating. She says Johnny, but never Dom. The police arrive to tell her about the death of her sister and tell Cordell that Fran West has denied ever meeting him, meaning he and Lorraine both have opportunity, if no motive, to kill Christine. So off Cordell goes again, this time to Fran West again, but here he learns something important. Fran West identifies Dom Archesi as the man who hired Knowles, doing so using Johnny Bridges' name. Leaving West's flat, he is mugged by two thugs who are interrupted by the police officer following him, and one of them is arrested. The other escapes. After recovering from the worst of his injuries, Cordell goes looking for Ryan and spends a long scene in a jazz club which, while interesting to an extent, really doesn't move the plot along until the final lines where Ryan, Lorraine's band leader, admits it was him that stole the money but that he intended to repay it, and Cordell's acceptance of that as the limit of his involvement is far quicker than mine would have been. In fact, when he asks him directly if he shot Dom, Ryan says, "Why would I want to, ... and Cordell drops the questioning entirely. Compared with how much time he spent interrogating Ryan's landlady, the speed at which he drops this line of investigation is rather unconvincing. But it's probably the only part of the book that is as unbelievable as that, unless you count his success with women, given the fact that he's been homeless and drunk for some time now. The police learn that Dom Archesi had a sizable military pension. That would have been his wife's had she not been killed herself. They then learn too that somebody has tried to kill Lorraine, and they race to her apartment. They find bullet holes, a gun on the fire escape, but Lorraine herself unhurt. Learning that the rival PI, Dennis Knowles, set the mugger on him, he confronts Knowles in his office. But his threat, "I hope to hell you've got insurance, Dennis," is enough for him to realise who he needs to see to crack the case, and he sets off to confront the killer. Though the plot is a little more linear than you might expect, and the surprise twist is no surprise at all if you've read even a single book in this genre, The Gutter and the Grave is a very enjoyable read. A little more trashy than your average Chandler, but no less enjoyable for it. The girls are all buxom and always making a move on the hero for their own reasons. That cliche is a little too tired even here. Cordell is a little less likely to make a pop culture reference than Marlowe, which makes him a little bit more accessible nearly 70 years on. His hard luck story by being cuckolded by his former assistant is probably a little tamer in the current era than in the 50s, but though it's a little incongruous with his womanizing, and especially with the in-text explanation for that, you always get the sense that his tempestuous, broken relationship, its violent end, drives this character. I like that his ex, Tony McAllister, would regularly be in his thoughts, and she becomes a lively character, even without really appearing in the story. McBain indulges in a pithy one-liner, slightly more than Hammett, but slightly less than Chandler. But regardless of your preference, Cordell is an engaging lead. The women he meets are genre staples, but they have their own lives too. With one or two minor characters the story could manage without, the supporting cast is still a convincing group. But his eye for character doesn't take the author's eye off the scene in any way. The passage where Cordell and Bridges enter the tailor shop is probably a highlight. We were moving towards the curtained doorway when the rain started. It started with a crackling streak of lightning and an answering bellow of thunder, and then the rain poured down suddenly in giant spattering drops, sweeping across the streets and pavement. Outside, people began running for shelter. Another lightning streak shattered the sky. With the brooding weather closing in, scattering the more sensible denizens of New York, the tension builds. It's clear Cordell is about to discover something more than a wonky till. The harsh assonance of that crackling, spattering and shattering helps that setting brood with menace. When Cordell relates the story of battering his wife's lover, these ands and the alliteration here give the passage the pulse of the blows that he unleashed. With more buxom femme fatales than an entire series of these books would need, a typically down-on-his-luck narrator, and a good feel for the setting, The Gutter and the Grave is easy to recommend to fans of the genre or of Chandler and Hammett. Cordell's narration and investigation hold a good pace, and there's enough flying fists and snappy wit that it remains interesting and fun throughout. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe for more.